What if catastrophic global events, from devastating earthquakes to flash floods, are not natural disasters, but a secret geological war being waged? Follow me down the rabbit hole about the Russian radio station UVB 76. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we are talking about UVB 76. Thank you, Dustin, Christy, and Chad, for requesting this episode. Before we jump in, I love to thank our sponsors. So, thank you, Wise Wolf Gold. Guys, if you want gold and silver delivered straight to your front door for as little as $50 a month, go to rabbithole.gold right now to sign up for your subscription. It's so easy, so easy. And also, if you want Bitcoin, you can go to Wise Wolf Bitcoin to get all the Bitcoin, all the help, white glove service over there. If you need any help with your Bitcoin, Wise Wolf Bitcoin, that's the place to go. Also, don't forget, you can get rabbit hole merch right now at stayskeptical.com under the shop tab. Anything you want to know about this podcast, you can go to stayskeptical.com. Get ready to dive straight into the deep end with this one, guys. UVB 76, an anonymous radio signal, also known as the buzzer, has been broadcasting a monotonous hum since the Cold War, a sound widely theorized to be the very audible heartbeat of Russia's terrifying dead hand nuclear failsafe system. But what if the constant buzz is a Russian military command frequency for weaponizing the Earth and communicating with foreign intelligence spy agencies? The UVB 76 radio, commonly known to listeners as the buzzer, is an anonymous shortwave radio station that has been broadcasting a constant monotonous hum on the 4625 kilohertz frequency since the Cold War. What is super strange about this radio is that no government or person has ever claimed responsibility for the broadcast, which consists of a low mechanical pip repeating about 25 times per minute. For over 5 decades, the station's purpose has been completely shrouded in mystery. The most terrifying and persistent theory is that the buzzer is the audible heartbeat of Russia's perimeter system, famously known as Dead Hand. This is a nuclear fail deadly mechanism, an automated retaliation system designed to ensure a counterstrike, even if the Russian command structure is completely obliterated. The constant buzzing acts as the all clear signal, while actual silence is the threat. If Moscow is destroyed in a nuclear attack and the signal stops, basically there's complete silence, that silence would be the trigger for Dead Hand to automatically launch command missiles, ensuring a final automated act of mutually assured destruction. This plausibility was demonstrated in 2010 when the signal briefly fell silent before moving its location, sparking global panic among the shortwave listening community. On extremely rare occasions, the hum is suddenly interrupted by cryptic voice messages known as code drops. These messages follow rigid, recognizable formats like monolith, which is a single code base. All user interface, business logic, and data access layers are all developed and deployed together in a single code base. The message is typically consisting of 4 symbol call signs, such as N, Z, H, T, I, all spelled out phonetically, followed by long sequences of numbers. These messages are clearly intended for military or intelligence assets. Analysts believe these are not nuclear launch codes, but war footing or combat readiness alerts, instructing dispersed deep cover units to be ready for the next phase of conflict and putting the command and control apparatus on notice. Instead of staying static, the radio sends a clear signal with a distinct pattern whenever Russian military activity is about to ramp up. For long stretches, sometimes up to several years, the radio remains a monotonous hum, occasionally interrupted by maintenance checks, the sound of Russia's strategic posture set to standby. However, its voice message and even music activity spikes dramatically during moments of maximum global instability. The station became the most verbose it had ever been in the days and weeks leading up to the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, delivering dozens of cryptic transmissions in a single day. The code words sent immediately before the conflict included ominous, seemingly random Russian phrases, suggesting this activity was not a test but active preparation. Also, a more shocking synchronization has been heard. The timing of recent code drops appears to be linked to the highest levels of diplomacy between Russia and the United States, suggesting they are not tied to random military drills. Citing reports from open source monitors, cryptic code sequences like the famous NZHTI call sign, followed by number groups, have been broadcast hours before or immediately following high stakes phone calls between Presidents Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. This suggests the codes are a direct operational response or communication linked to those diplomatic dealings. The conspiracy speculates that this is a form of coercive signaling, basically a digital saber rattle. They are a verified, timed message meant for a separate parallel intelligence infrastructure, an infrastructure managing the very thread of geopolitical destabilization. But the message could also be a diplomatic weapon. During high pressure talks where strategic balance is negotiated, the appearance of UVB 76 code acts as proof of capability. These codes signal to Russia's dark deep state assets that the diplomatic window is open and their specialized services might be required, specifically the activation of the highly sensitive and deniable tectonic weapon system. This elevates the cryptic code from a nuclear launch trigger to a geophysical deployment trigger, transferring a routine presidential phone call into a masked command sequence for the weaponized natural disaster. This pattern suggests that UVB 76 is not just a relic of the Cold War, but an active, integral piece of Russia's leverage, timed perfectly to intimidate or manipulate its diplomatic counterpart in real time. A tectonic or geophysical weapon is the ultimate deniable weapon, a device that exploits the Earth's natural geology rather than relying on traditional missiles. Its chilling objective is to target and tickle the unstable energy accumulated deep within tectonic plates or fault lines, releasing that stored stress in the form of a devastating earthquake, tsunami, or volcanic eruption. This capability would allow a state to destroy a major city or disable a strategic military base while leaving the distinct fingerprint of a natural disaster, because they love doing that. This concept is not just a theory. In 1992, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, a corresponding member of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Alexei Vsevolodovich Nikolayev, publicly defined the concept. He stated that a seismic weapon would be the, quote, use of the accumulated tectonic energy of the Earth's deeper layers to induce a destructive earthquake, end quote. Even though Nikolayev sounded doubtful about its ability to be executed at the time, the fact that a high ranking Russian scientist provided a formal definition of what the weapon would be demonstrates that the concept was once a serious subject of research. During the Cold War, a technological arms race existed deep underground, reportedly carried out under two secret Soviet programs known by the codenames Battle Mole and Metro 2. Series suggests these programs explored two methods of exploitation. The first involved high energy detonation, using small strategically placed underground nuclear charges to inject massive amounts of energy into a pre-stressed fault line, essentially utilizing the blast as a percussion cap to trigger a much larger stored geological release. The second method focused on seismic vibrations, involving the development of massive synchronized vibrator platforms. Some of these vibrators, allegedly weighing hundreds of tons, were designed to send precisely tuned low frequency pressure waves deep into the Earth's mantle from very long distances. These waves would seek out a fault line already close to snapping and give it the subtle final push that it needed. One report even claimed that one vibrator was built in Novosibirsk before the program was officially shelved. While official Soviet accounts claim these programs were deemed too unpredictable or costly and were abandoned during the post Cold War conversion, a dark theory conclusion remains. The research either stopped or it merely went dark, maturing into a highly classified, deniable asset, which is probably more likely. Because the whole genius behind this is that this weapon, this kind of weapon, is complete plausible deniability. You can't verify that somebody caused a natural disaster. Another theory is that the real difficulty may not have been in the inability to make it, like to make this weapon work, but the failure to control it enough for a peacetime environment. The idea that Earth itself could be weaponized provides the perfect unseen threat for the cryptic military grade communication emanating from the UVB 76 Doomsday Radio. On July 30th, 2025, a massive 8.8 magnitude earthquake, one of the strongest recorded in decades, rocked Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula. The epicenter that is frighteningly close at approximately 75 miles offshore from the heavily fortified Russian military zone known as Rybachiye Nuclear Submarine Base. Rybachiye, also known as Vilunchinsk, is not just a military base. It represents the single most vital military facility for Russia's nuclear deterrent in the Pacific. It serves as the home port for the country's most advanced strategic ballistic missile submarines, including the Bore and Bore A classes. These vessels carry the Bulava nuclear missiles and represent the second strike capability that forms Russia's ultimate deterrent against the West. If the operational readiness of Rabuchier is compromised, the entire Pacific nuclear posture is crippled. While Russian officials maintain their silence about the incident, verifiable damage was captured on many satellite images, including Google Maps, and by commercial satellite imaging firms like Planet Labs. Their before and after photos reveal a critical floating pier. Part of the newer infrastructure intended for the advanced Bore submarines was visibly damaged, bent, and torn from its anchors by the tsunami wave. This damage was a devastating operational setback. Even if the nuclear submarines themselves were unharmed, the damage to the infrastructure necessary to dock, maintain, rearm, and deploy these strategic assets forces Russia to divert resources and severely compromises their readiness. It is a profound, unexpected injury to the most sensitive part of their nuclear triad. It's even more suspicious that the injury happened right when nuclear threats between Russia and the US were at their peak. Weeks prior, there was a hostile exchange involving explicit references to the dead hand system. Also, the earthquake struck right around the same time that President Trump confirmed he had ordered the deployment of US nuclear submarines to the appropriate regions near Russia, a public strategic countermove. This sequence of events doesn't sound like a coincidence. We don't even believe in coincidences anyway. Many people believe the earthquake wasn't natural, but a result of a secret weapon triggered by codes sent over the UVB 76. Supposedly, it was one of the most visible threats between Trump and Putin. So, this theory is that the tectonic weapon is fully built and operational, and the UVB 76 radio commands the system that runs it. And that brings us to the weapon itself. What would a tectonic weapon even look like? The Belgorod is Russia's largest submarine with extra thrusters, which allows hovering, a deep diving mini nuclear powered submarine attached to the bottom, and 6 Poseidon intercontinental nuclear powered, nuclear armed autonomous torpedoes. Although a tectonic weapon is not officially confirmed to exist, the Belgorod is similar to what it could be. It is designed to evade missile defense systems and detonate near a coastal area. The goal of this weapon is to destroy vital economic installations of the enemy in coastal areas and cause guaranteed devastating damage to a country's territory by creating wide areas of radioactive contamination. By detonating large nuclear warheads underwater near a coastline, the weapon would intentionally generate a massive, highly destructive radioactive tsunami capable of flooding vast areas and rendering them inhabitable. The weapon would involve detonating a device at a precise point on a major seismic fault line with the specific goal of destabilizing the fault and triggering a massive, naturally occurring earthquake or volcanic eruption that would then cause a tsunami. The theory is that Russia uses the radio buzzing and messages like a monolith to put its biggest, most secret weapons on the ready status. This just gives them a huge advantage when they're trying to make a deal. They're like, look, everything's already ready to go. All I have to do is press a button. Everything goes. The entire system is theorized to function not as a traditional weapon of war, but as a weapon of coercion, serving as a tool for President Putin to use in his high stakes dealings with the US over issues like sanctions, resource access, and nuclear parity. This message seems to be pretty simple. Russia possesses the ability to inflict maximum deniable destruction, and its actions are tied directly to the decisions made by its adversaries. One question to ask is, would Russia choose to strike its own Robachier nuclear subbase? One theory, the failed test, suggests that the strike was intended for a different target, like a critical seabed cable or a military asset of the neighboring US ally, but the unpredictable nature of the tectonic weapon caused it to trigger near the massive pressurized subduction zone off Kamchatka, hitting its own facility instead. This outcome would deliver a doubly terrifying message. Basically, Russia can trigger these events, but even the Russian state cannot perfectly control the scale of the resulting chaos, which I think would be scary on both ends. Another theory is, could the US have this same technology? This theory, covert natural leverage, suggests that the US was sending a warning to Russia as leverage in negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. By engaging in a natural disaster war, it kept the battle subdued without risking World War III nuclear level involvement around the entire world. It's just right there. And you can't prove that the US did it. A more interesting but probably less likely theory is the calculated demonstration theory. It suggests that the Rebuchier hit was deliberate and calculated. By striking and damaging its own nuclear submarine base, the centerpiece of its Pacific deterrent, in a way that mimics a natural disaster, Russia sends an undeniable classified message directly to US intelligence. That message is threefold. We did this, proving the tectonic weapon is real. We are serious enough to sacrifice our own assets, which is a very Russian thing to do, by the way, also proving intent and desperation. And finally, imagine what we can do to your coastlines. Because if we're going to do this to our coastlines, we can do even worse to you. The damage to Rebuchier, visible through satellite imagery, could be used as a bargaining chip. It is the physical proof that the cryptic codes heard on UVB 76, which coincide with the Trump Putin calls, are linked to a system capable of literally weaponizing the Earth, forcing leaders to reconsider their stances, including those on sanctions or strategic deployments. The UVB 76 is the command signal. The Soviet era battle mole is the secret capability. The damage to the Rabachier submarine base is the proof of concept, and the high stakes political negotiations between Trump and Putin are the environment where this hidden geological warfare takes place. What makes this whole theory so convincing is a clear repeating pattern in the timing that proves a terrifying secret Russian weapon is directly linked to US Russian negotiations. The typical function of the UVB 76, a simple channel marker or dead hand standby signal, is discarded the moment leaders engage in high stakes talks about issues critical to the Kremlin, like sanctions relief, trade deals, and strategic arms limits. This pattern is marked by specific, multiple instances where President Trump and President Putin schedule a phone call or meeting, and either hours before or immediately following that communication, the radio erupts. It abandons its monotonous hum for specific coded words like Azotobach and strings of undecipherable numbers. The theory suggests that this pattern indicates the codes serve as a control mechanism for the negotiating table rather than being random transmissions. They are a prearranged status change signaling to Russia's covert assets, including those managing the tectonic weapons program, that the diplomatic window is open and that the level of strategic pressure should be adjusted. Like, turn that thing up. Let's make them do what we want them to do. The codes themselves serve as proof that the High Command is prepared to deploy a deniable, catastrophic threat if the deal goes sideways. Basically, this makes us ask a crucial question. Was the Kamchatka earthquake a natural disaster or a calculated threat? If the UVB 76 codes serve as a confirmation of readiness, the actual Kamchatka 8.8 magnitude earthquake becomes the physical proof of capability, tied back to the preceding diplomatic tension. The damaged Rabachier nuclear base serves as the perfect demonstration, a disaster with the geological signature of a natural event, but the timing and target of a strategic military strike. It's like so good. Honestly, if anybody's going to build a weapon, like the most plausibly deniable weapon, this is it. Some people believe this was all part of the new silent war and the whole thing was a calculated move, which is also terrifying because if they're starting the silent war, we don't know who's attacking who. We don't know what natural disaster is actually a natural disaster and what's actually created by man. And also, we don't know if it's our own government attacking our own country or if it's a different government attacking. Like, we would never know. They claim the cryptic message from the radio is what secretly activates the tectonic weapon, giving Moscow a way to gain a strategic advantage in major global negotiations. Just this year, the UVB 76 has had several interruptions. February 12th, the first direct exchange between Putin and Trump was recorded as lengthy and productive. The radio log reads, "Buzzer is not on air." February 13th, the radio log reads, "Jamming the buzzer with techno im." On February 28th, a highly publicized meltdown between Trump, Vice President Vance, and Ukrainian President Zelensky at the White House occurred, leading to the cancellation of a scheduled press conference, Zelensky's early departure from the White House, and the minerals deal between the U.S. and Ukraine remaining unsigned. During the heated conflict, Trump was quoted as shouting at Zelensky that he was gambling with World War III. On March 3rd, user The Buzzer radio log reads, "Raw music playing over the buzzer." User in THTI radio log reads, "Pirates, some waterfall art too." The same user logs again, "Faint shot." On March 4th, the radio log reads, "Music LSB S5. Horn beeps S5 S7 on buzzer. Music USB S4.5 on buzzer. The buzzer beeping after Rick roll playing." March 17th, the radio log reads, "Pirate playing music. UVB 76 RUS," meaning Russia. "Sounds like crying," and "pirates." So that was the day before a call that focused on the need for a ceasefire and peace in the Ukrainian war. So White House specified to an agreement to begin energy and infrastructure ceasefire negotiations. And this is when Putin agreed to a temporary 30-day pause from attacking Ukraine in exchange for Ukraine doing the exact same thing. And then 2 days later, the radio log reads, "Spray painting noises. The location indicated in Ukraine." On May 19th, a reported excellent call by Trump, which Putin reportedly answered while touring a music school, went very well regarding a ceasefire agreement from March. A coded message was transmitted during a period of international tension coincided with the call between Presidents Putin and Trump. Just ahead of the call, the radio broadcasted a variety of codes, letters and numbers, and then another variety of codes with letters and numbers. On May 31st, the radio is reported to be beeping and the log reads, "Pirates." On June 1st, multiple messages were broadcast. Again, a variety of like numbers and letters. All started with NZHTI, which is like the normal call sign that you would see before numbers and letters are being, it seems like almost random letters and numbers are being broadcast. June 3rd, the radio log reads 18.0 duck number 5. On June 4th, an unspecified but confirmed call was held, and it has different code words were being broadcast just hours after the call between Trump and Putin about Russian retaliation in Ukraine. So every time there's a call, so the call's on June 4th, on June 3rd, you have like this random like 18.0 duck number 5. Like that doesn't make any sense to us. But it was broadcast over the radio, and then you have this call between the presidents on the 4th. On June 13th, the radio log read "the buzzer," and then on June 14th, there was an unspecified discussion over the war in Ukraine and Iran. On June 25th, the log reads "Ukrainian Nazis." On July 1st, the log read "the buzzer very quick." The next day, it said "weird statics." On July 3rd, there was an unspecified discussion between the presidents, but confirmed as another call regarding Iran and Ukraine. And then, interestingly enough, as we all know, on July 4th, flash flooding on the coast of Texas resulted in many people going missing and over 100 deaths, most notably the catastrophe at Camp Mystic. So all of this happens right when they're having these negotiations, which was like such a weird flood too. We were like, where did this come from? It was out of the blue, and we looked up in the sky, but none of us looked at the seismic activity that was happening underground. On July 5th, the next day, the radio log shows a sentence, "Pirates playing Russian anthem." And July 7th, again, the word "pirates." July 16th was a 7.3 magnitude earthquake that happened off the coast of the Alaskan Peninsula. A 4.8 tempo is heard coming from the radio that same day. And like we talked about earlier, on July 30th is when the Russian earthquake happened, the 8.8 earthquake. The radio record shows, quote, the BU Russian buzzer, URRS, end quote. URRS meaning Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. That was the preferred abbreviation within the country until World War II, by the way. On August 1st, a clearly audible but unrecognizable sound emitted from the radio. On August 8th, a coded broadcast was recorded as Pirates Buzzer Out. August 15th, there was an in-person summit at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Anchorage, Alaska, between U.S. attendees, including President Trump, Secretary of State Mark Rubio, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and Russian attendees, President Putin, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and Foreign Policy aide Yuri Ushakov. They reportedly discussed the war in Ukraine, imagine that, including a potential ceasefire and possible territory concessions, though both leaders held short press conferences after, stating that they had made progress and agreed on many points, but the summit ended without a concrete deal for the Ukraine ceasefire. An unspecified call was made between the presidents. Soon after that, the Department of Homeland Security declared a storm disaster warning for Alaska. So whatever they talked about during their meeting, their in-person meeting on August 15th, obviously didn't go well because they're having some storms in Alaska 3 days later. On August 25th, strange shuffling noises and a repeat of the May 19th code were broadcast. On September 9th, a message with Russian names and coded terms were broadcast over the radio. The names Nikolai, Zhenya, Tatiana, and Ivan, spelling out the station's call sign in ZH, and I. A voice followed the names with the numbers 38, 965, 78, 58, 88, and 37. Unclear what those numbers were for. But then it followed with more names, Olga, Tatiana again, Elena, and Leonid, which form the Russian word for hotel, OTEL. The transmission ended with soft sign, 78, 58, 88, 37. This was just a day before Poland reported an airspace violation by Russian drones. This also happened to be just a day before Charlie Kirk was assassinated. So there was all this activity on September 9th, and then all these crazy things were happening on September 10th. On October 6th, the station transmitted the code NZHTI, followed by numbers, and then the Russian word for nutcracker, and then more numbers. On October 11th and 12th, Alaskan Governor Mike Dunleavy declared a disaster when Typhoon Halong brought record storm surge flooding to Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, which is part of western Alaska. October 16th was a confirmed lengthy phone call described as productive that reportedly influenced Trump's stance against sending Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. And right after the hurricane that hit Jamaica, there was a bunch of activity. I don't have this written down in my notes, but there was a bunch of activity on the radio log yet again. And it wasn't making that humming that it normally makes. It was making almost like a beeping sound. This is not just a Trump versus Putin theory. Here are a few other prominent notations made from the UVB-76 dating back to 2012 when Obama was in office. On December 17th, 2012, the radio log shows airstrike. 17 people were killed and 70 were injured by a blast from a massive car bomb in a market in Pakistan. This came at a time when Russia was showing a willingness to lift its embargo on arms sales to Pakistan, with the possibility of supplying attack helicopters to Pakistan to assist in counterterrorism and security operations. The attack on Pakistan reinforced the need for the deal and eventually paved the way for the sale of advanced Russian military equipment, which begs the question, did Russia attack Pakistan so that way they were more apt to buy their military equipment? That seems like a very Russian thing to do. And then 2 days later, on December 19th, 2012, at about 2:30 in the afternoon, the radio log shows nuke call sign. On this same day, a nuclear-related incident occurred at the Susquehanna Steam Electric Station in Pennsylvania, where an automatic reactor shutdown was triggered. And then 14 minutes later, from 9759 kilohertz, radio log shows Washington, some interference from Russia. The Citizens Voice newspaper interviewed Eric Epstein from the chairman of the nuclear watchdog group 3 Mile Island Alert and learned that he has a chronology of incidents at the plant dating back to 1982. Epstein is quoted saying, quote, "We need to be careful. If some of these plants are not operating as they should, we need to do triage. We need to correct it. This is troubling because nuclear power plants are not supposed to shut down this frequently," end quote. So he's like bringing attention to like this nuclear power plant just shut down. Like, what's going on? We need to look into this. On March 25th, 2013, music was reported coming from the UVB 76. On this same day, the Syrian civil war was taking place. More specifically, it had been reported that there was an increased CIA intelligence sharing with 5,000 well vetted rebel units. The pro Syrian government forces at the time were said to have been backed by Russia and Iran. However, President Obama had sanctioned the effort to arm the rebels with large quantities of weapons, stating it would give the US some control over the extremists. The U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry pressed Iraq to stop Iranian arms flights to Syria, and the leader of the Syrian opposition resigned. The multi-billion-dollar covert program known as Timber Sycamore included training, funding, and weapons for selected rebel groups and continued for several years until it was ended by President Trump in 2017. The official narrative of Trump's decision to end the program came from a desire to work with Russia to end the conflict. On June 28, 2013, Russian voices were reported on the radio log but were inaudible. News was reported that Edward Snowden, a former CIA contractor, was stranded in the transit zone of Moscow's international airport. Just 2 weeks earlier, on July 14th, Snowden had been charged with espionage by the U.S. government for leaking classified NSA documents. President Putin stated, quote, "We can hand over foreign citizens to countries with which we have an appropriate international agreement on the extradition of criminals. We do not have such an agreement with the United States," end quote. It is reported that the National Security Agency had cultivated relationships with phone companies and internet providers to obtain domestic records following the September 11th attacks. This information, along with more, may have been shared by Snowden with Russia, which we kind of covered last week. August 1st, 2013, the radio log reported that the signal was down, and on that same day, Newsweek.com reported that Edward Snowden finally leaves the Moscow airport. President Putin granted Snowden a certificate of asylum, allowing him to remain in Russia for up to 1 year, renewable indefinitely, under the condition that he, quote, "stops all activities that could damage the United States," end quote. On November 16, 2016, the radio log indicates that someone was talking into the radio. On this day, the Saudi Arabian led military coalition and the Houthis reached a ceasefire agreement, effective the following day, November 17th, following talks led by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry with the region's leaders. The Guardian claims that Secretary Kerry wanted to break through to end the fighting between the Houthis, who were aligned with Iran, and the Saudi-backed government of Yemen. At the same time, in Russia, President Putin was signing a symbolic order to withdraw Russia's signatures from the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, ICC, amid calls by pro-rebel Western non-governmental organizations for the investigation into alleged Russian war crimes in Syria. Russia, like the US, Egypt, Iran, and Israel, signed but failed to make the agreement legally binding, making it unlikely the court could ever prosecute their governments. The Rome Statute is the 1988 treaty that established the ICC to prosecute individuals for the most serious crimes of international concern, such as genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and aggression. So you've got like Russia, the US, Egypt, Iran, and Israel that did not sign it. I mean, they signed it. They didn't make it legally binding because they're like, yeah, look, we're doing it. Just kidding. So dumb. On December 13, 2016, the radio log states Bolsonaro 2018 ad amico. Ad amico is originally an Italian word, here written in Brazilian style text that translates to let's go. This is crucial for credibility because then Congressman for Rio de Janeiro, Jair Bolsonaro, did not announce his run for presidency until July 22nd of 2018, almost a year and a half later, which he won the following October after being stabbed while campaigning on September 6, 2018. Throughout his presidency, Jair Bolsonaro maintained a strategic relationship with Russia, which culminated in a controversial visit to Moscow in February of 2022, only days before the invasion of Ukraine. If we fast forward to around the time just before the Ukraine war began, there is a significant increase in activity starting on January 29th, 2020 with music, and the most significant day of this increase is on February 26th, 2020, just 2 days after the first attacks took place. This is eerily similar to the popular catchphrase that caught on in the Trump election, "Let's go, Brandon," as well as the assassination attempts experienced by both Bolsonaro and Trump. Many political sources have claimed that Putin's leverage on Trump may be related to their past dealings. Although there is no official confirmation that Putin and Trump have direct communication leading up to 2016, it is on record and confirmed that Trump's legal team and the Russian government were involved in business deals to build Trump Tower in Moscow. A source close to the Kremlin has been quoted as stating, quote, "Speed, impact, and showiness, those are things Trump intuitively values," end quote. Officials have also brainstormed building a 150-story Trump Tower in Moscow City. The fact that officials are making this scenario public during extremely tense negotiations suggests that significant developments are occurring behind the scenes that the general population is completely unaware of. As of October 21st, 2025, the radio log indicates that the station experienced a tone change and it began making this hissing sound similar to like what an open mic would sound like. This is the same day that President Trump's second summit with President Putin was postponed, with Trump stating that he did not want the summit to be, quote, "a waste of time." Russia conducted another airstrike on Ukraine, killing 6 people, including a 6-month-old baby. So let's put this all together and see what we're actually looking at here. We've got the UVB 76 radio, that weird constant buzz that's supposedly the heartbeat of Russia's dead hand system, that nuclear failsafe that guarantees they'll hit back no matter what. Then we have the whole story that the Soviet tectonic weapons program, which is a totally deniable way of basically waging war by using the Earth itself. And finally, we've tracked this crazy impossible timing where the buzzer's cryptic codes suddenly blast out right when Putin and Trump are in the middle of these high stakes negotiations. Notably, the radio call log containing examples of bizarre reports that coincide with significant global events related to Russia. If this whole conspiracy is true, the method is super creepy. The dead hand signal, those rare UVB 76 voice codes, is the get ready order. The tectonic weapon serves as the payload, providing a means to unleash chaos in the form of natural disaster, and the high level political negotiation is the moment they decide to act. That catastrophic Kamchatka earthquake we talked about, it was either a total miscalculation, proving the weapon is real but dangerously uncontrollable, or, and this is the darkest part, it was a planned, targeted warning against their own people. Typically, we understand the basic rules of warfare. Missiles are tracked, treaties are signed, geology just does its own thing. But if this theory is correct, everything has changed. The real threat isn't some missiles launched with a 30-minute warning. It's a silent frequency carrying some strange Russian phonetic code, followed by the planet's crust suddenly shifting, or a car bomb exploding in a crowded market, or mass floods in Texas, or potentially a hurricane in Jamaica. The next time we happen to hear that strange buzzing in our shortwave radio, or read a headline about a massive earthquake hitting some strategic location, we have to ask ourselves, was that just a natural event? Or was it the sound of a very serious war deal finally being signed? The answer may be hidden in the static. Shout out to the global community of shortwave radio enthusiasts. They're the frontline observers in the shadow conflict, and we need more people listening to that. They can tell us when something crazy is about to happen because they know, and they're always like on there, and they're paying such close attention to these frequencies. You can join them by tuning a shortwave receiver or using an online web SDR to the frequency of 4625 kilohertz and use the upper sideband or USB. If you hear that buzzing, suddenly stop, or more importantly, if it's interrupted by a cryptic Russian voice, a monolith, or a user code drop, it could be the signal for the next catastrophic geological event, timed perfectly to coincide with the next round of high-level international negotiations. Because War has changed so drastically, we don't even know what to expect anymore. But of course, until next time, my friends, stay skeptical, and I will see you all then. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast written, hosted, and produced by me, Danny Mercy. Special thanks to Lindsay for research and writing. If you love the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you're listening. Follow us on social media at rabbit.holepodcast and visit our website at stayskeptical.com for everything else.